My name is Charlene Voss. I am 41 years old, and I'm holding a pill organizer right now, white plastic, 7 compartments, the hinge on Wednesday cracked so it doesn't close all the way, and the whole thing smells faintly of lavender, because my grandmother kept a sachet in the drawer where she stored it, because this is the object my parents left behind when they drove away from Maple Crest Senior Living on a Thursday morning and did not come back. The Wednesday compartment was full, so was Thursday, so was Friday, Saturday, Sunday, 5 days of blood pressure medication, a calcium tablet, and half a thyroid pill scored down the middle with a kitchen knife because the pharmacy doesn't make them in her dose. I turned it over in my hand in that lobby, and my thumb found the crack on the hinge before my mind caught up with what I was looking at. That crack wasn't where, the plastic had been forced open and snapped back. Someone had opened Wednesday's compartment in a hurry, looked inside, and closed it hard enough to split the latch. They had checked what was in it, they had not given it to her. I didn't move. I stood in that lobby holding the organizer with both hands, and something in my chest went very still, the way a dial goes still when you zero a scale before you weigh anything. I was already reading the object the way I've read 10,000 objects before, not for what it was, but for what had been done to it and when and by whom. Before I tell you what this pill organizer led me to, and what it cost my father when I traced it back to its beginning, I want to know where you are right now. Drop it in the comments. I want to know where this reaches. Because this organizer sat in a drawer in a facility for 9 hours before anyone handed it to me. And what I found inside it wasn't medication, it was a map. My name is on the paperwork as Charlene, but nobody has called me that since I was 11. I'm a pharmaceutical compounding technician, 14 years behind a laminate counter at a specialty pharmacy in Rochester, Minnesota. My hands smell like nitrile gloves and isopropyl alcohol 6 days a week. I weigh powders on analytical balances sensitive to 1/10 of a milligram. I mix suspensions for children who can't swallow pills and capsules for patients whose doses don't exist commercially. I read prescriptions the way a mechanic reads engine noise, not the words, the patterns. The refill interval, the dosage changes, the prescriber switches that tell you someone's been doctor shopping or someone's been forgotten. I catch errors that would kill people if I didn't, a decimal point, a trailing zero, a substitution that looks right on the label and is wrong in the body. That skill had caught 11 critical dispensing errors in a single calendar year at my pharmacy. It was about to dismantle my own family from the inside out. The lobby at Maple Crest smelled like floor wax and the ghost of institutional soup. My grandmother was not in it. She'd been moved to a room on the 2nd floor 3 hours before I arrived because, according to the intake coordinator, a woman named Pam Sheehan, she had refused to sit in the lobby chair any longer and had started walking toward the front door. They redirected her. That's the word Pam used. Redirected. I asked for the intake paperwork. Pam hesitated. She looked at her screen, then at me, then at the organizer in my hand. The family member who admitted her signed the intake consent, she said. You're listed as secondary emergency contact. Secondary. My mother was listed as primary. I'd had the same phone number for 9 years. No one had called it. My grandmother's suitcase was behind the nursing station on the 2nd floor. Inside it, 2 addresses, 1 pair of slippers still in the plastic from a dollar store, a toothbrush in a Ziploc bag, and no reading glasses, no hearing aid case, no address book, no photographs. And the pill organizer, tossed in on top, Wednesday through Sunday full. That was my father's work. I knew it the way I know a misfilled prescription by the weight of the bottle before I open it. My mother would have packed the glasses. My mother would have remembered the hearing aid. My father packed this suitcase the way you pack a suitcase for someone you've already decided isn't coming home. I need to go back now, because this organizer has a history that starts long before that Thursday morning. My grandmother, Evelyn Voss, taught piano in Winona, Minnesota, for 43 years. She owned her house outright, a 2-bedroom bungalow on Olmsted Street with a screened porch and a piano that had belonged to her mother. My grandfather died in 2007. Within a year, my father Richard had moved her finances into a joint account he described as simpler for everybody. I was 22 and working my first pharmacy tech job in the Twin Cities, and I did not ask a single question about it. The irony is that I spent every working day verifying that the right medication reached the right patient in the right dose at the right time. Verification was my entire professional identity, and I never once verified what my own father told me about my grandmother's money, not once in 19 years. What I knew was this. Dad handled Grandma's bills. Dad maintained the house. Dad brought her groceries on Tuesdays and drove her to church on Sundays and took her to Dr. Oster every 3 months for her blood pressure check. My mother reinforced this at every holiday with a tight smile and a sentence she delivered like a weather report. Your father does everything for that woman. Nobody else lifts a finger. I accepted this. I accepted it because my brother Todd accepted it, and Todd's wife accepted it, and my mother's sister accepted it, and the congregation at Redeemer Lutheran accepted it. The whole system was a closed loop of assumption, and I lived comfortably inside it. What I did for my grandmother was small and consistent. I called her every Sunday evening. I visited 4 times a year, her birthday in March, Easter, Thanksgiving, and one visit in August that had no occasion attached to it. I mailed her lavender sachets from a shop in Rochester because she'd mentioned once, in 2011, that she liked the smell. I sent them every December. She put them in her dresser drawers. I know because every time I hugged her she smelled like them, and every visit, the house looked a little worse. The porch screen had a tear in it by 2016. The kitchen faucet dripped by 2018. The piano was out of tune by 2020, and by 2022, 2 keys didn't play at all. I mentioned these things to my father exactly once each. He said the same thing every time, with the same hand on my shoulder, the same level voice. I've got it handled, Charlie. You worry about your own house. Moan. So I did. I worried about my own house. I worried about my own pharmacy. I worried about my own son Micah, who was 6 the year the piano keys stopped working, and 10 the year my grandmother disappeared into a facility lobby with a suitcase packed by a man who didn't know she needed reading glasses. The call came at 2:14 on a Thursday afternoon. I was behind the counter checking a pediatric amoxicillin suspension. The math was wrong on the script, the decimal was off by a factor of 10, and I had already flagged it and was waiting for the prescriber callback. My phone buzzed. Unknown number, 507 area code, Winona. This is Pam Sheehan at Maple Crest Senior Living. I'm calling about Evelyn Voss. I put the suspension down. I set the graduated cylinder on the counter with both hands. My coworker Rena looked at me. I said, I need 15 minutes, and I walked into the break room and sat on a folding chair and listened. Pam told me what she knew. Family member brought her in at 10:40 that morning. Intake paperwork signed by Richard Voss, 1-week respite stay, prepaid by check. The resident had not spoken to staff. The resident had not eaten lunch. The resident was asking to leave. I asked Pam one question. Did she ask you to call me? Long pause. She asked us to call her granddaughter. She said, don't call my parents, call Charlene. She didn't have your number memorized. We found it on the intake form under secondary contact. She knew my name, she didn't have my number. My father had listed me as secondary contact, not so I'd be called, but so the form would look complete. I drove an hour and 40 minutes to Winona. I drove it with my hands tight on the wheel, and the pill organizer sitting on the passenger seat where Pam had handed it to me in a clear plastic bag like evidence, which is what it was. I found my grandmother in room 214, sitting on the edge of an unmade bed in her coat, buttoned to the collar, with her purse on her lap. The room smelled like bleach and something under the bleach that wasn't clean. She looked at me and said, I need my glasses. I said, I know. I brought her home. The house was exactly the way you leave it when someone tells you you're going to lunch. Coffee cup in the sink. Reading glasses on the kitchen table next to a crossword puzzle folded open to a Thursday, hearing aid in its case on the nightstand. The front door was unlocked. The porch light was on. At 2 in the afternoon, I set the pill organizer on the kitchen table next to the crossword puzzle and opened it. Wednesday, full. I looked at the date on the crossword, Wednesday's paper. She'd been doing the crossword Wednesday evening. Someone had come Thursday morning. Whoever packed the suitcase had opened Wednesday's compartment, seen the pills, and closed it without giving them to her. She had missed Wednesday night's dose and all of Thursday's. I went to the bathroom. The medicine cabinet had 3 prescription bottles. Lisinopril, 10 milligrams, prescribed by Dr. Oster. Levothyroxine, 50 micrograms, same prescriber. calcium carbonate, 600 milligrams, over the counter. I turned each bottle in my hand the way I've turned 10,000 bottles. The lisinopril label was dated April of this year, 30-day supply. Refill, 4 of 5 remaining. I counted the pills, 22. The math didn't work. If she'd been taking them daily since April, the bottle should have been empty in May. She should have been on refill 3 or 4 by now. She was still on refill 1. Someone had been refilling this prescription and not all of it was reaching her. That was the moment my hands went still. I set the bottle on the counter and I didn't move for what felt like a full minute. The bathroom was small and the light above the mirror buzzed at a frequency I could feel in my back teeth. I stood there and something in me began running calculations I hadn't asked it to run. Pill count against date against refill number against days elapsed. The numbers didn't reconcile. They didn't reconcile by a lot. I put all 3 bottles in my bag. I went back to the kitchen. My grandmother was making coffee. Filter, scoop, scoop, half scoop. She talked about the sugar being in the blue canister now, because the lid on the white one didn't seal. I let her finish. Then I sat down and asked her who'd been managing her prescriptions. She set the cup in front of me and said, "Your father picks them up." I asked her how often. "Every month. He brings them in a bag from the pharmacy. Sometimes he counts them into the organizer for her. Sometimes she does it herself." I asked her which pharmacy. She didn't know. "He just brings them." The bottle in my bag was from Olmsted Street Pharmacy. I knew the pharmacist there. Her name was Gail Lindstrom, and she'd been behind that counter for 20 years. I called her the next morning. Gail pulled the profile. Evelyn Voss, 3 active prescriptions. Lisinopril refilled 9 times in the past 12 months. The refill history was regular. Every 28 to 30 days, someone picked it up. The name on the pickup log every single time, Richard Voss. 9 refills in 12 months. I had a bottle dated April, with 22 pills in it. He was picking up the medication. He was not delivering all of it, or he was delivering it late, or he was letting the organizer run empty and refilling it in batches. Any one of those meant her blood pressure had been uncontrolled for months. I asked Gail to print the refill log with pickup dates. She did it without asking why, because Gail knows what a wrong number looks like the same way I do. That was layer 1. The obvious insult. She was in a facility without her medication, and the medication she had at home wasn't adding up. Layer 2 came from the pill organizer itself. I sat at my kitchen table that Friday night with a flashlight and a magnifying loupe I use at work for reading compounding instructions in small print. I opened each compartment. Wednesday through Sunday were full, the pills I'd already counted, but Monday's compartment had a residue in it, a faint powder, pale yellow. Levothyroxine is pale yellow in a certain generic formulation, but my grandmother's levothyroxine was white. I knew this because I was holding the bottle. White tablets, 50 micrograms, manufacturer Milan. The yellow residue was not Milan's formulation. It was a different manufacturer, a different pill, possibly a different dose. Someone had been putting a different tablet in that compartment. I scraped the residue into a clean vial and capped it. Monday morning, I ran it at work. Our pharmacy has a reference library and an HPLC unit for compounding verification. The residue was levothyroxine, 25 micrograms, half her prescribed dose. Someone had been substituting a lower dose into her organizer. For how long, I didn't know yet. But I knew what undertreated hypothyroidism looks like in an 86-year-old woman: fatigue, confusion, memory lapses, saying the wrong name on the phone, the symptoms my brother had described when he said she hadn't been right since spring. She hadn't been right since spring because someone changed her medication in spring.
I went back to Gail. I asked for the NDC numbers on every levothyroxine refill for the past year, the national drug code that identifies the exact manufacturer and strength dispensed. Gail pulled them.
Every single refill was Mylan, 50 micrograms, the correct drug, the correct dose, picked up by my father every month. What reached my grandmother's organizer was something else. Layer 3. I needed to know if this had happened before. I drove to Winona on a Wednesday and sat at my grandmother's kitchen table and went through the roll-top desk in her front room, tax receipts, insurance statements, and a manila folder of medical records she'd kept herself. Doctor. Oster's visit summaries going back to 2019. In November of 2021, Dr. Oster had noted patient reports increased fatigue, mild confusion, TSH elevated, discussed medication compliance. He'd increased her levothyroxine to 50 micrograms from 25. She had been on 25 before. Someone who knew that history could substitute the old dose, and a doctor would see exactly the symptoms you'd expect from an elderly woman declining naturally. And there was a second note, from March of this year. Patient appears undertreated, TSH again elevated. Reports taking medication as directed. Consider assisted living evaluation if cognitive symptoms persist. That note had been copied to my father. The assisted living evaluation, written in March. She was in a facility by June. Layer 4 opened on a Tuesday afternoon, and it opened because of the pill organizer's hinge. I'd been holding this object for 6 days, turning it over, reading it the way I read every object that passes through my hands. The cracked hinge on Wednesday, the forced plastic. Someone had opened it hastily, checked the contents, and closed it hard. Why check it? Why that day? I went back to the intake paperwork Pam had given me, the 1-week respite stay, prepaid by check. I asked Pam for a copy of the check. It took 2 days. When it arrived by fax, I read the routing number first, because that's what I do. I verify the source before I verify the amount. The check was drawn on a joint account at First Winona Savings, the account holder names printed in the upper left corner, Richard P. Voss and Evelyn the 1000th. Voss. He'd paid for her facility stay, out of her own account. I called the bank. I identified myself as Evelyn's granddaughter, and was told I had no access to account information without the account holder present. I drove my grandmother to the bank the next morning. She sat across from a woman named Deirdre Hahn, and requested a full statement for the past 12 months. Deirdre printed it, 18 pages. My grandmother signed the request form in handwriting that was firm and clear and unhesitating, and Deirdre watched her do it, and I watched Deirdre watch her do it. The statement showed a pattern that went back years. Monthly transfers out of the account, to my father's personal checking, to a credit card in my father's name, to a truck payment, to a property tax bill on a house my grandmother did not live in. Small amounts individually, 200 here, 350 there. Always below the threshold that would trigger a bank flag. Always on a schedule that looked like bill payments. The total, over the 12 months covered by those statements alone, was $14,267. My grandmother read the number at the bottom of the page I'd circled. She set her glasses down on the bank's conference table and folded her hands exactly the way she'd folded them in that facility lobby. She didn't say anything. Deirdre excused herself to get water and came back with 3 bottles and a box of tissues that nobody touched. I want to tell you about my brother. Todd is 3 years older than me, and for most of my life, Todd was the one I called when I didn't know what to do. He lives in La Crosse with his wife Jenna and their 2 daughters. He works road construction. He is not a bad person. I want to be clear about that because what I'm about to say will make you want him to be, and I'm asking you to resist it. Todd knew about the facility. He told me later that Dad had mentioned it in April, floated the idea as a temporary solution while he looked at longer-term options. Todd had said, "Whatever you think is best, Dad." He'd said it the way he says everything to our father, which is quickly and without asking what it means. When I called him that Thursday night, after I'd brought Grandma home, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "She's been confused, Charlie. Dad said the doctor recommended it." I told him the doctor recommended an evaluation, not an admission. I told him about the pill organizer. He said he didn't want to get in the middle of it. The next week, I sent him the refill log and the lab report on the residue. He didn't respond for 3 days. Then he texted, "I talked to Dad. He says you're overreacting. He says the pharmacy must have switched manufacturers." He didn't ask why a pharmacy switch would result in half the dose. He didn't ask because asking would mean he'd have to do something with the answer. But on the day I took Grandma to the bank, Todd drove down from La Crosse. He didn't call first. He was sitting on the porch when we got back, and he looked at the statement I put in front of him, and he turned to page 11 where I'd flagged a $400 transfer, dated the same week my grandmother's porch screen had torn and not been repaired. He looked at it for a long time. Then he went into the kitchen and stood at the sink and ran the water without filling anything. When he came back, he said, "I should have come down here more." He didn't say he was sorry. He wasn't ready to say that yet. He wouldn't be ready for another 2 months. But he stopped calling Dad for a week after that, and in Todd's language, a week of silence is a declaration of war. The confrontation happened at my father's house. He'd built an addition onto it in 2019, a sunroom with a cathedral ceiling and reclaimed wood beams he'd posted photographs of online. It was the room he brought people into first, the room that said, "I built this." He'd invited the whole family for a Sunday lunch 3 weeks after I'd brought Grandma home. He said it was to clear the air. He said it in a voicemail I still have on my phone. My grandmother sat in his sunroom in a chair she hadn't chosen, in a room she'd partially paid for, and she set her purse on her lap and waited. My mother had arranged cold cuts on a platter. Todd was there, Jenna. My son Micah, 10 years old, was in the backyard. I had the pill organizer in my bag. My father started the way he always starts. Warm, reasonable, generous with context. "Look," he said, pouring iced tea, "nobody handled this perfectly. I should have called you first, Charlie. I'll own that. But Mom needs more help than any one of us can give her, and I've been the one giving it for 20 years. My mother set the platter down in the exact center of the table and said, "He hasn't slept through the night in months." I waited. I let the room fill up with the version of events they'd rehearsed. Then I took the pill organizer out of my bag and set it on the table next to the cold cuts. The crack in Wednesday's hinge was facing up. I didn't explain it. I just set it there. My mother looked at my father. Todd looked at the table. "That's her pill case," my father said. "She leaves them everywhere." I set the refill log next to it. 9 pickups in 12 months, every one signed by him. He shifted forward. "I pick them up for her because she can't drive." Is that a crime now? I set the lab report next to the refill log. Levothyroxine, 25 micrograms, not the 50 her doctor prescribed, not the 50 the pharmacy dispensed. My father stood up. "You're going to sit in my house and accuse me of, Charlie, she mixes them up herself. She's 86 years old." My mother's voice came from somewhere behind him, thin and practiced. "She's always been like this. She told me last Christmas she thought Micah was Todd's boy. She's not well." Todd said nothing. Jenna put her hand on his knee under the table. I set the bank statement on top of the rest. 18 pages. I opened it to the summary page where I'd highlighted the total in yellow. My father said, "That account was set up for household expenses. Everything in there went to her care." "Her porch screen has been torn for 2 years," I said. "Her piano has 2 dead keys, her faucet drips, $14,000 went out of her account in 12 months, and none of it went into her house." He put both hands flat on the table, on top of his reclaimed wood, in his sunroom, under his cathedral ceiling. "After everything I've done, 20 years I've been driving over there, 20 years. And in those 20 years," I said quietly, into the room he'd built, "you made sure she got just sick enough to need you and never well enough to check." That was the sentence. I didn't say another one. The room was silent for what felt like a geological age. The doorbell rang. Nobody had invited Dr. Oster. He came because Gail Lindstrom had called him. Gail had looked at the refill records and the lab report, and she'd called the prescribing physician, because that is what a pharmacist does when a controlled medications chain of custody doesn't reconcile. Dr. Oster stood in the hallway of my father's house, asked to see Evelyn, and sat down across from her. He looked at her. He looked at the pill organizer. He looked at the bank statements. Then he looked at my father and said, "Richard, I wrote a referral for cognitive evaluation based on symptoms that are consistent with undertreated hypothyroidism. I'd like to order new labs this week, and I'd like her medication management transferred to her granddaughter effective immediately." Dr. Oster didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He was a physician who had written a medical recommendation that had been used to justify a facility admission, and he was now standing in a room where the evidence suggested the symptoms he'd observed had been manufactured. His reputation was in the room with him. He was not going to leave it there. My father said nothing. My mother said, "This is not appropriate. Not here. Not in front of family." Grandma didn't speak. She was watching the pill organizer on the table, the cracked Wednesday hinge, and I saw her hand move toward it and then stop. She left it where it was. The weeks that followed were quiet, the way a house is quiet after something structural shifts. Deirdre Hahn at First Winona Savings froze the joint account pending a review my grandmother requested in person, in writing, at the bank's conference table. My father's name came off the account on a Tuesday. The monthly transfers stopped the same day. He received a letter from the bank requesting documentation for the transfers. He did not respond. Dr. Oster's new labs came back 10 days later. My grandmother's TSH was elevated, consistent with months of undertreatment. He restored her to the correct dose. Within 6 weeks, the fatigue began to lift. The confusion cleared. She stopped mixing up names. She finished the Thursday crossword and started on Fridays. The co-op board at Redeemer Lutheran quietly removed my father from the building committee in August. No one made a motion. The chairman simply stopped sending him the meeting schedule. My mother resigned from the women's circle the same week. She told people it was her back. Adult Protective Services opened a case in September after Dr. Oster filed a report. I did not file it. I want to be clear about that. A physician who believes a patient's medication was tampered with has a legal obligation, and Oster met it without asking permission. The investigation is ongoing as of the last time I checked. No charges have been filed. My father retained an attorney. Todd drove down to Winona on a Saturday in October and spent 4 hours replacing the porch screen. He didn't call first. He brought his daughter Lily, who is 12, and she sat on the porch step and held the screen taut while Todd stapled it. When he was finished, he sat on the step with his grandmother, and they didn't talk about anything important. He came back the next Saturday and fixed the faucet. The Saturday after that, he brought a piano tuner. The tuner was a woman named Meg, who drove over from Rochester and spent 2 hours bringing the instrument back. When she was done, my grandmother sat down and played something I didn't recognize, and Meg stood in the doorway with her tools and listened and didn't charge for the visit. Todd called me that night. He said one sentence. I should have asked what was in the bag. He meant the pharmacy bag, the one Dad brought every month. He'd seen it. He'd never opened it. I told him I heard him. I did not tell him it was fine because it wasn't fine yet. That's where we are with it. Not fine, but in the room together. My mother has not called me. She has not called my grandmother. She sent a card at Thanksgiving, no note, just the printed message and her name. My grandmother put it on the refrigerator with a magnet from the propane company. She puts everything on that refrigerator. It doesn't mean forgiveness, it means she hasn't decided yet. On the 1st of December, I drove to Winona and sat at my grandmother's kitchen table and organized her medications into the pill organizer myself. I do this once a month now. I drive an hour and 40 minutes each way, and I sit at that oilcloth table, and I open each compartment, and I count the pills, and I verify the manufacturer and the dose, and I close each lid, and I check the hinge on Wednesday. I found a piano teacher in Winona who takes adult students. My grandmother teaches her granddaughter's friend's daughter on Tuesday afternoons now. She charges $15 a lesson and puts the cash in the blue canister where the sugar used to be before she moved it to a different tin. Micah goes with me on the December visit. He's 10. He sat on the piano bench beside her, and she showed him where middle C is, and he pressed it with one finger, and the note held in that front room for a long time, clear and in tune, and neither of them said anything while it lasted. I had the pill organizer in my hand that morning. I'd taken it home to replace the cracked hinge with a new one from the pharmacy supply closet. But when I held the new one, smooth white plastic, no crack, no history, I put it back. I glued the old hinge instead. I set it on her kitchen table, Wednesday facing up, the mended crack visible if you knew where to look. She picked it up and turned it over in her hand the same way I had in that lobby. She opened Wednesday, she closed it, the hinge held. There is a difference between loyalty and obedience that most families never need to learn, because in most families, they feel the same. You do what's asked, you trust the person asking. You don't check the bottle, because checking the bottle means you've already stopped trusting, and stopping trust feels like betrayal before it feels like protection. I know this because I lived inside that confusion for 19 years. I picked up every call, and drove every visit, and mailed every sachet, and never once opened a pill bottle that wasn't handed to me across a pharmacy counter. My obedience looked exactly like love. It was comfortable and clean, and it almost killed her. What I know now is that loyalty isn't the absence of suspicion. Loyalty is the willingness to look at the bottle and stay in the room after you've read what's inside. It's the drive to Winona. It's the hinge glued back together. It's sitting at a table once a month and counting what someone else should have counted, and choosing to keep showing up after the counting reveals what it reveals.